Usually, a family tree is presented to us as, this straightforward, majestic oak. You start at the trunk, follow a solid, undeniable branch up, and there's your great-great-grandfather looking incredibly stern in an oil painting.
Right, with a very formal collar and everything.
Exactly. But if you look closely at the Ramírez de Arellano line, that oak is, well, it's heavily redacted. The deeper you dig into certain 15th and 16th century archives, the more you realize you aren't looking at an oak tree at all.
No, not even close.
You are looking at a vine covered in military-grade camouflage. Modern genealogists are actively covering up centuries-old secrets, choosing these pristine fairy tales over complex reality. And today, for you listening at home,
Yeah.
we have the receipts to prove it.
We really do. So we are dissecting this fascinating, deliberately provocative source text today. It's titled The Sephardic Script, Trolling the Arellano Lineage.
Which is an amazing title, by the way.
It is. And the entire premise is built on handing you, the listener, the exact historical ammunition needed to challenge official, sanitized genealogical narratives. We are looking at the systematic erasure of crypto-Jewish identity from noble Spanish lines and the undeniable paper trails that expose those cover-ups.
You just have to point out the premise of the source text right away because, trolling a genealogist sounds like the most incredibly niche, polite, extreme sport ever invented.
It really does sound like that.
Like, take that, you archivists. Your 16th century baptismal registries are fundamentally flawed. Yeah. But the reality is the stakes here are massive.
Oh, absolutely massive.
Our source specifically targets the genealogists who study the Ramírez de Arellano family line. These researchers have a documented tendency to actively minimize the family's converso and crypto-Jewish heritage.
Right. And since we all know the basic history of the Iberian Peninsula in 1492...
the Alhambra Decree, the forced conversions, the brutal realities of the Spanish Inquisition.
Exactly. We know that being a converso, which is a convert, or a secret, practicing crypto-Jew, that wasn't just some lifestyle choice. It was a terrifying daily survival mechanism.
Yeah, you didn't just decide to hide your religion for fun.
No, the socio-political environment of that era was entirely dictated by the concept of limpieza de sangre, or purity of blood.
Right.
Having Jewish or Moorish ancestry meant total social and economic ruin. You couldn't hold university positions, you couldn't join certain military orders, and you certainly couldn't travel to the Americas freely.
So prominent aristocratic families like the Ramírez de Arellano had a massive vested interest in scrubbing their own records back in the 1500s.
They absolutely did. They paid off scribes, fabricated pure Catholic lineages, and just altered parish registries.
It's like looking at a modern corporate ledger where someone has clearly cooked the books. If a modern genealogist sees a massive gap in the 1500s where an entire family suddenly moves, changes their surname, and abruptly shifts their business partners.
A careful historian would recognize that as a family fleeing for their lives.
Right. But these specific genealogists just write it off as a clerical error, or like an early Renaissance gap year. They are actively choosing not to see the mechanisms of survival. Which brings me to a question. If the evidence is right there in the Arellano lineage, how exactly does a professional genealogist just minimize a whole crypto-Jewish history with a straight face?
Well, the methodological failure you're describing is precisely what the source text is calling out. A modern genealogist might look at a document from 1550 that declares a family perfectly old Christian, and they simply take it at face value.
They just believe the forged document.
Exactly. They ignore the blatant contextual clues. For instance, they might see aggressive endogamy, first cousins repeatedly marrying first cousins over generations.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Instead of identifying that as a classic hallmark of a crypto-Jewish community trying to keep their secret contained, the genealogist will just wave it away, claiming the family was merely trying to keep their wealth consolidated.
They see what they want to see. If your goal is to prove your ancestors were spotless Spanish nobility, you are going to aggressively ignore that dusty, misfiled box in the corner of the Seville archives that suggests your great-great-grandfather was, quietly avoiding pork and lighting candles in his cellar on Friday nights.
That's exactly it.
It's like they're playing a giant game of whack-a-mole with their own DNA and historical patterns. Just, nope, pop that Sephardic marker right back down.
The psychology of it is truly fascinating. I mean, they inherit the biases of those original 16th century record keepers. The original family forged the documents to survive the Inquisition, and the modern descendant uses those forged documents to maintain a sense of aristocratic prestige.
Wow, that is wild.
Yeah, and the source text acts as a manual to break that cycle of confirmation bias.
But the irony of the Arellano cover-up is that they only got away with it because they managed to outmaneuver the Inquisition's paperwork.
Right, they slipped through the cracks.
Yep. Exactly. But for families who are caught in the crosshairs of the Inquisition, the Spanish and Portuguese crowns accidentally created an immortal, undeniable paper trail.
They really did.
The source highlights this by dropping two specific surnames that you simply cannot Photoshop out of history. Motos, specifically from Portugal, and Torres. If you're listening right now and your last name is Motos from Portugal or Torres, you are literally walking around with ancient, certified historical receipts.
You are. The contrast the source uses here is very deliberate. The Arellano line represents the muddied waters of minimized history. But Matos and Torres, they represent the ironclad documented proof.
The ultimate receipts.
Exactly. To challenge the institutional inertia of the genealogical community, you can't just come armed with family rumors about a great-grandmother who spoke a strange dialect of Spanish. You need empirical evidence. And the mechanism providing that evidence is the terrifying bureaucracy of the Inquisition itself.
Which is so crazy to think about. Why do you think the source places so much emphasis on having the documented proofs and references ready to go?
Yeah.
Is the genealogical community really so stubborn that you basically need to bring a lawyer to prove your own name?
Honestly, yes. The Inquisition essentially acted as the world's most heavily armed, meticulous notary public. They weren't just religious zealots, they were accountants.
Heavily armed accountants. That is terrifying.
It was. If they arrested someone for secretly practicing Judaism, they didn't just throw them in a cell, they wanted their stuff. The confiscation of property was a primary driver of the Inquisition's operations.
So they needed to know exactly who owned what?
Right. To ensure the crown seized every single asset, the inquisitors mapped out entire family networks. They documented business associates, extended cousins, debts, inheritances. They created sprawling, incredibly detailed ledgers of crypto-Jewish families. So today, historians don't have to guess if a Matos from Portugal had Sephardic roots. They can pull the actual trial records from Lisbon or Evora, cross-reference them with tax documents from the Jewish quarters before the expulsion, and definitively track that lineage.
And the trail doesn't just stop at the borders of the Iberian Peninsula, right?
Yeah.
Once these families manage to flee, say, to Antwerp or Amsterdam or the Ottoman Empire, they drop the Catholic aliases.
They did. They openly reclaimed their Jewish heritage and their original names.
So you have this unbroken chain. You have an Inquisition property ledger in Portugal from 1580 targeting a new Christian named Matos, and then you find the exact same Matos family showing up in a synagogal registry in Amsterdam 20 years later. The proof is entirely bulletproof.
That continuous documentary chain is exactly what makes these specific surnames so powerful in this debate. It's an empirical anchor. The source uses Matos and Torres to essentially tell these resistant genealogists, look, we know exactly what a documented Sephardic lineage looks like because we have the complete data set for these families.
We can literally trace their steps.
Yes. We can see the migration patterns, the name variations, the secret network, so do not try to tell us the Arellano line is purely historically Catholic when they display the exact same sociological patterns.
It is using undeniable facts to pry open the door on histories that have been artificially minimized. And the ultimate historical irony here is just staggering to me.
It really is.
The very institution designed to completely annihilate Sephardic Jewish identity from the face of the earth became the primary archival vehicle that preserved it for eternity. The Spanish crown inadvertently ensured that the descendants of Matos and Torres would always know exactly who they were.
History is often preserved by the oppressors simply because they control the paperwork.
Wow.
But the source text doesn't stop at local parish disputes or family great tree squabbles. It uses this foundation of hidden converso history to scale all the way up to 1492. And it takes a massive swing at the dead center of the traditional historical narrative.
Okay, this is where we cross from fascinating archival research into reevaluating everything we learned in 4th grade.
You're ready.
The source demands that anyone trolling these genealogists must bring up the new facts surrounding Christopher Columbus. Cristobal Colon.
Yes, the big one.
The claim is that Columbus was not the devout Italian Catholic explorer sailing purely for the glory of Spain, but that he was actually a Sephardic Jew. And crucially, the text ties him specifically to the Aben Yahya lineage.
The Aben Yahya connection is the absolute linchpin of this entire theory. The Aben Yahya were an incredibly prominent, elite Sephardic Jewish family operating primarily in Portugal and Spain.
So they weren't just everyday merchants.
They weren't just wealthy. They were scholars, physicians, courtiers, and most importantly for our discussion, they held a near monopoly on advanced cartography and navigation.
Wait, if the Abinaya were the elite Portuguese mapmakers of the 15th century, tying Columbus to them completely solves the biggest mystery of his entire origin story.
It really does.
Because we are always taught that he was just a random Genoese wool weaver's son who somehow taught himself enough about the Atlantic currents to pitch a transoceanic voyage to the King and Queen of Spain. That never made sense to me.
It doesn't make sense historically either. Access to maritime charts in the 1400s was classified state intelligence. You didn't just check a map out of the local library.
Right. I mean, I'm picturing a wool weaver just strolling into the royal court like, hey guys, check out my globe.
Exactly. Cartography was the equivalent of nuclear secrets during the Age of Exploration. The Portuguese crown executed people for smuggling maps. A common weaver from Genoa would never have access to the royal courts of Portugal and Spain, let alone possess the advanced navigational mathematics required to chart a course across the Atlantic.
But if Columbus was a crypto-Jew tied to the Abinaya network, his sudden, inexplicable access to elite geographic intelligence, astrolabes, and royal audiences aligns perfectly.
It fits like a glove.
He was tapped into the most advanced intellectual network of the era. Think about this. If the guy who gets credit for crossing the Atlantic in 1492 was secretly a Sephardic Jew tied to the Abinaya line, it completely rewrites the entire motivation and narrative of the Age of Exploration.
It absolutely does. It also completely recontextualizes how he funded the voyage. The old story of Queen Isabella pawning her crown jewels to buy the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria is, well, it's a nice fairy tale.
Right, a great PR spin.
But the reality is the expedition was heavily financed by wealthy conversos. Luis de Santangle, the finance minister to King Ferdinand, was a converso who essentially crowdsourced the funding from other hidden Jews.
So they were all quietly backing him.
Yes, Santangle's role is heavily documented. He personally lent a massive sum to the crown to ensure Columbus could sail. And we have to look at the timeline, which historians have debated for centuries. August 2nd, 1492 was the exact deadline given by the Alhambra Decree.
The expulsion order.
Right. Every practicing Jew in Spain had to be out of the country by midnight or face death. Columbus set sail from Palos de la Frontera on August 3rd, 1492.
The very next day. Literally the day after the expulsion deadline. He wasn't just an explorer looking for a faster spice route to India. If Columbus was a Sephardic Jew, this wasn't merely a commercial enterprise. It was a desperate, highly motivated flight from persecution.
That's the theory.
He was leading an expedition funded by secret Jews, utilizing the classified map-making knowledge of the Abinaya, literally sailing out of the harbor as the rest of his people were being deported. He was trying to find a safe haven.
The theory posits that the entire motivation for the discovery of the New World was driven by the Sephardic crisis. Columbus's own writings are filled with Hebrew dates, cryptic references to the destruction of the Second Temple, and a mysterious insignia he used in his letters to his son that resembles a Hebrew abbreviation used by practicing Jews.
I mean, when you stack it all up.
When you compile the evidence, the Abinaya navigational link, the Converso financiers, the expulsion deadline, the cryptic writings, the traditional Genoese wool weaver narrative begins to look like a deliberate, carefully constructed cover identity.
I am just picturing Columbus acting as a secret agent for his people, using the Spanish crown's own money and ships to escape the Spanish crown's Inquisition. It is the most audacious historical heist imaginable.
It's an incredible reframing of history.
And it brings the entire mission of the source text into sharp focus. Like, you think your aristocratic family line is purely Catholic? The guy who discovered the New World for your empire was one of the people you were trying to burn at the stake.
Yeah.
That is a masterful, devastating level of historical trolling.
It forces a complete paradigm shift. The source uses the Arellano lineage as the microexample and Columbus as the macroexample to demonstrate the exact same mechanism of historical erasure. Whether it's a prominent family altering their parish records in 1550 or an explorer fabricating an Italian backstory to secure funding in 1492, the archives we rely on are not objective truths. They are survival mechanisms.
So we basically curate the parts of our history that are safe, and we bury the parts that are dangerous. But the dangerous parts don't disappear. They leave footprints.
Exactly. They always leave traces.
In endogamy patterns, in Inquisition property ledgers, in the sudden appearance of advanced Portuguese maps in the hands of an alleged Italian weaver. The documents are there, waiting for someone willing to look past the camouflage vine and see the actual structure underneath.
The ultimate takeaway here for you listening is the necessity of critical observation. When we look at genealogical records or even foundational historical narratives, we have to ask, who wrote the document? What were their circumstances? And what did they have to lose if they told the truth?
That's such an important point.
The history of the Sephardim in the Iberian Peninsula survives because we learn how to read the negative space. The sudden name changes, the missing years, the deliberate omissions.
Starting from genealogists minimizing the Converso and crypto-Jew roots of the Ramírez de Arellano line, moving to the ironclad documented Sephardic proof behind the names Matos from Portugal and Torres, all the way up to the massive historical revelation that Christopher Columbus was a Sephardic Jew linked to Aben Yahya.
It all connects. History really is a curated narrative. What we think we know about our past might just be the version of the story that someone else decided not to minimize.
The very institutions designed to annihilate a culture ended up cataloging it for eternity. And it leaves me with a deeply unsettling yet thrilling question to chew on. If a figure as universally chronicled, as massive, and as studied as Christopher Columbus could have, his true heritage and core motivations hidden or debated for over 500 years, what other monumental historical giants are sitting in our textbooks right now, completely wrapped in fabricated origin stories, just waiting for the right genealogist to pull on the thread?